Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Kremlin associates once believed they held the winning strategy in the Ukraine conflict as winter set in. They calculated that relentless strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure would prove decisive, combining drones and missiles to plunge Ukrainian civilians into darkness and freezing cold. Yet Russia could not have been unaware that Ukraine would not yield easily. By January 2026, Russia crossed a threshold with ferocious assaults on the capital, Kyiv. Before diving into the details, comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace. Ukraine's response came on the night of January 25, and it was a powerful, devastating counterblow. Over recent weeks, Russian airstrikes had intensified steadily. Following the January 9 attack on Ukraine's power grid, the Kremlin even openly outlined its brutal plan: apply pressure to force Ukraine to the negotiating table. Amid incoming missiles and roaring drones, Putin's close spokesman Dmitry Peskov echoed his boss, declaring that the situation is worsening for the Kyiv regime and Ukraine's decision-making space is shrinking. In plain terms, Russia would keep hammering the grid, compelling Ukraine to negotiate or let its people freeze. By January 20, Russia launched yet another assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure after the January 9 strike. According to reports from The New Voice of Ukraine, this ranked among Russia's largest barrages to date. The capital, Kyiv, faced ballistic missile strikes that triggered massive explosions, shaking the entire city. At least one fire broke out, and water and power supplies on Kyiv's left bank suffered severe disruptions. When the Russian assault ended, Ukraine tallied 18 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, 1 Zircon missile, and 339 attack drones launched by Russia. The ferocious Russian operation achieved some successes but fell short of expectations. Ukraine performed remarkably, ensuring most Russian missiles and drones missed targets on January 20. While some inflicted damage, much potential harm was mitigated. This did not quell Ukraine's anger. Retaliation was inevitable, and it would prove fierce. Russia showed no sign of stopping. On January 24, mere hours after Ukrainian, Russian, and U.S. diplomats met in Abu Dhabi to discuss a possible ceasefire, Russia proved its peace rhetoric hollow. More missiles and drones rained down on Ukraine. Air raid sirens wailed as explosions rocked Kyiv again. One European diplomat observed that Moscow was sending messages with fire. This is Putin's negotiation style, not through words or sincere commitments, but through death and destruction to crush the enemy. According to the Kyiv Post on January 25, over 800,000 Kyiv residents endured unstable power. The January 24 attack alone knocked out heating in 6,000 buildings and cut electricity to 88,000 households. Emergency crews labored nightly to restore power to as many as possible. Russia's early winter strategy undeniably worked. Kremlin missiles and drones severed widespread heating and electricity. Yet Putin failed to break Ukrainian resolve as he had hoped. Sadly for Ukraine, these energy infrastructure attacks tie back to its Soviet past. Though Ukrainians rejected Soviet control, especially in the Union's final years, BBC analysis suggests Soviet-era urban planning aids Russia's winter strategy. Widespread reliance on centralized district heating in Kyiv poses a major vulnerability. This Soviet-style setup heats water at external plants before pumping it through systems serving thousands of homes. Russia targets those heating plants to strip warmth from Kyiv's people. Generators and batteries offer temporary fixes for blackouts, but strikes on heating facilities create far graver problems. Fear is precisely what Putin seeks to instill in Ukraine. Over the past 2 weeks, Russia bombarded Kyiv and other cities with terror strikes lacking military purpose. The victims are not Ukrainian frontline soldiers but civilians, the elderly, the ill, children who take no part in combat and only wish to survive Russia's brutality. All to coerce Ukraine into negotiations on Putin's maximalist terms, which he knows Ukraine will never and should never accept. As usual, however, Putin underestimated Ukrainian resolve. Valentina Verdeletska, deputy director interviewed by The Guardian on January 13, stated firmly, "I think the Russians want to break our spirit. There is no other way. We must endure these hardships. They want Ukrainians angry and miserable, thinking that will drive us to protest in the streets, but that will not happen." Putin should heed voices like Verdeletsky's. He should also recall Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's stark September 2025 warning when Ukraine anticipated escalated grid attacks. If they threaten to cut power in Ukraine's capital, the Kremlin should know that Russia's capital will also lose power. Russia must understand that civilized nations differ from barbarians. They never strike first and are not aggressors. But that does not mean they are weak. On January 25, Russia felt Ukraine's strength and the ruthlessness of its retaliation. Putin appeared to disregard Zelensky's warning. Overconfident, or perhaps callous to his own people's suffering, he pressed on with attacks. On January 20, the Kremlin ramped up rhetoric and escalation. Reuters reported that night strikes targeted key transformers vital for nuclear safety, signaling Russia no longer cared about risking catastrophe on Ukrainian soil. That same day, Russia expended missiles and drones worth roughly $131 million, showing Putin's detachment from national finances. Spending over $130 million on a single barrage amid a $70 billion budget deficit, per Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, hardly qualifies as prudent. Putin harms his own citizens. Just one day after the January 24 assault, Ukraine struck back swiftly and forcefully. Ukraine targeted Belgorod, the border region Russia has used as a staging base for ground and air attacks since the so-called special military operation began in February 2022. Back then, Putin and Kremlin insiders likely assumed Belgorod residents had nothing to fear, believing Ukraine incapable of counterstrikes. They figured it mattered little if the area hosted power plants, key military bases, and hundreds of thousands of civilians, since Ukraine would collapse before war reached Russian soil. 4 years later, events proved Putin and his allies gravely mistaken. On January 25, Ukraine delivered a stinging blow to Putin's arrogance, with an airstrike that Belgorod officials called the largest scale ever endured by the region and city during the Ukraine war. Per the Kyiv Post, this retaliatory energy strike saw Ukraine apparently employ HIMARS to trigger at least 50 explosions, cutting power and water across swaths of Belgorod. It demonstrated Ukraine's adherence to tit for tat. Ukraine's primary target was the Belgorod Thermal Power Plant, TPP, on Pivnichno-Donetska Street. The facility took multiple hits, likely from HIMARS, multiple rocket launchers. Russian air defenses failed to stop the Ukrainian airstrike, making the TPP the most prominent victim. Ukraine had strong reasons to select this target. Echoing Zelensky's September remarks, though not striking Russia's capital, Ukraine hit a plant supplying heat to central and northern Belgorod areas, covering over 36% of regional heating demand. That left roughly 115,000 Belgorod residents at risk of losing heat from Ukraine's latest strike. Though Russia typically downplays Ukrainian successes, this time concealment proved impossible. Russian telegram channels, including pro-Ukraine outlet Astra, swiftly shared images of the aftermath, reminding Putin that Russia holds no monopoly on long-range lethal weapons. Astra noted, "Some strikes hit the Belgorod thermal power plant again. Many areas lost power, not just electricity but also running water. Monitoring channels say this ranks among the most powerful attacks. Locals report at least 50 explosions in the city." Videos captured multiple angles. One showed what appeared to be a Russian serviceman, possibly border guard or National Guard, inspecting debris from a January 25 strike on Belgorod. Another recorded numerous explosions amid blaring car alarms. And yet another depicted a large flash in the sky, likely a Ukrainian HIMARS rocket directly impacting the Belgorod TPP. Evidence surfaced almost immediately after Ukraine's strike, leaving Russia unable to cover it up. Instead, Belgorod officials lapsed into panic mixed with blame shifting. Regional Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov admitted Ukraine struck some of the area's most critical energy assets, labeling it the largest-scale attack seen in the Ukraine war. No casualties were reported, underscoring Ukraine's mastery of precision strikes without deliberate civilian targeting. Still, Gladkov noted an auxiliary structure caught fire and energy facilities sustained damage. He repeated Russia's familiar refrain. Due to shelling, an auxiliary building caught fire. Rescue teams are extinguishing it. Debris caused a fire in a city courtyard. Once more, Ukraine appears to possess the world's most accurate drone fragments. Later, Gladkov issued another statement revealing damage far worse than initially acknowledged. Homes, vehicles, and infrastructure suffered impacts, with Ukrainian missiles hitting multiple targets beyond the Belgorod TPP. Several settlements in Belgorod region, including Borisov, Valuysky, Volokhonovsky, Graveron, and Krasnoyarsk, faced attacks, some losing gas supply. This showed Ukraine succeeded in precisely hitting intended objectives. Ukraine offered no immediate comment on the January 25 Belgorod strike, perhaps letting actions speak for themselves. If Russia demonstrated on January 24 that peace talks are futile, Ukraine showed readiness to impose peace through its own strength. One certainty beyond struck targets. Ukraine apparently used HIMARS against Belgorod. Russian officials confirmed as much, and the weapons employment surprised no close observer of the Ukraine war. As a border region, Belgorod lies within HIMARS range, especially with Block 1, a rocket's extending reach to 186 miles. These rockets can carry unitary warheads or scatter 300 submunitions. HIMARS can also fire ATACMS missiles, and if employed on January 25, it would indirectly confirm U.S. approval for the latest strike on Russian territory. Washington instituted strict approval mechanisms in spring 2025, limiting Ukraine's ATACMS use. But a November 2025 strike with the missile suggested permissions might have resumed, and approval likely came again on January 25. Following Ukraine's January 2026 strike, Russian state news agency TASS quoted the defense ministry claiming it destroyed most, if not all, of what Ukraine fired, omitting any mention of hits. The ministry stated, "Air defenses downed 2 guided bombs, 31 U.S. made HIMARS rockets, and 68 fixed-wing drones." It further asserted Ukraine lost 1,335 troops in the so-called Special Military Operation Zone, though the reliability of such claims remains highly questionable. Ultimately, TASS reported the defense ministry claiming destruction of 670 Ukrainian aircraft and 283 helicopters since the war began, despite Ukraine possessing only 116 combat aircraft pre-invasion and receiving no more than that since. Russia clearly inflates its figures significantly. Ukraine's Belgorod strike was not mere vengeance or destruction of a regional heating plant. Per News Sky in October 2025, each Belgorod attack delivers a potent message to the Kremlin. Belgorod represents Russia's Achilles heel due to its 25-mile shared border with Ukraine. Logistics flows and troop rotations to Luhansk and Kharkiv regions pass through Belgorod, making it one of Russia's most vital rear-area hubs for supplies, personnel, and even battlefield power in Ukraine. Traditionally, such a region would count as deep rear, yet its border proximity places it within easy reach of Ukrainian missiles and drones. Thus, Belgorod strikes almost invariably target legitimate military objectives. More importantly for Ukraine, they shake the Russian rear, as News Sky described. Putin wants Ukraine's civilians to feel unsafe. Ukraine responds by showing the same applies to Belgorod and the troops it sustains through logistics nodes. HIMARS has proven one of Ukraine's most effective weapons against Belgorod, yet if Russian claims hold, they may soon field a comparable system. On January 25, United 24 Media reported Russia deployed a system dubbed the HIMARS destroyer called Sarma to the battlefield. This multiple rocket launcher supposedly answers HIMARS with similar capabilities. One issue: Russia's best HIMARS effort rests on the 19-year-old 9 A 52-4, prototype, never mass-produced. It remains unclear whether Russia's HIMARS destroyer can reliably hit targets, let alone match the American-made weapon's effectiveness in Ukrainian hands. Ukraine will watch Sarma closely to test Russian claims. For now, retribution has been delivered, and Belgorod once more lies shrouded in smoke and fire. Putin should have heeded Zelensky's September 2025 warning. Ukraine's January 25 success likely stemmed from a year-long campaign by the Ukrainian Security Service's elite Alpha unit, which alone in 2025 inflicted $4 billion in damage to Russian air defenses, carving safe corridors for Ukrainian drones and missiles. Comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace.